All right, guys, thanks for joining me once again. Today I'm going to share with you my latest book haul. I love hunting for books. It's one of my favorite things to do, and it doesn't matter where I go, I'm always on the lookout, searching high and searching low. And if I'm going out of state or out of the city, my eyes are always peeled to the sides of the road for bookstores that you just don't ever hear about because they might have some real gems. My wife and I love to go to antique stores, and that's also another one of my favorite places to go because a lot of antique dealers go to estate sales and they pick up these books that people have been holding on to for years. They've been sitting on their shelf immaculately, oftentimes completely unopened or barely used, and sometimes highly treasured by them. So they've taken good care of them. And I've found quite a few good books that have come from something like that. I usually found in an antique store. So that's one of my favorite places to go. But this last week, no, not last week, a couple weeks ago, we went to Goodwill, and I do not like going to Goodwill. It's one of my least favorite places to go, and it's certainly not someplace I would think of to go to look for books. Because I've been in there before, looked at what they have on the shelves, and it always just seems so cheap, And so I just don't usually bother. But our whole family went there almost this last time. So I'm walking around in agony because I just can't stand being there. And I'll just go back to the bookshelf there. And I never ever see anything there. And I go maybe to Goodwill once or twice a year. That's about it. That's it. Well, anyway, I was going through their stuff, and I actually found a number of books that I'm going to share with you here. And, they have to be in somewhat good condition if I'm going to do this. If I'm going to get a used book, it's got to be, it can't just be, ripped up, and it can't be, which I don't think they would sell anything ripped up like that anyway, but, it's got to have some integrity to it, I don't want it highly marked up. I don't mind some markings in the book, but that's the reason I just don't like going to someplace like Goodwill. Some used bookstores aren't even that great, You really have to dig deep sometimes, and other times you just get lucky right off the bat. And I felt that way that day I went to Goodwill. I just couldn't believe it. So here's what I got from that store. And I want to encourage you that if you like looking for books, maybe Goodwill is a good place to go, because after all, what you get one day there might not be the same thing as you get the next, because they have so much coming and going. And they're cheap. They're really inexpensive. Okay, so one of the first books I picked up was Isaac's Storm. Isaac's Storm. This is written by Erik Larson. I've been wanting this for quite a while. As you can see, it's still in really good condition. And Erik Larson is a fantastic writer of history. I've read, I believe, 4 of his other books before. The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. Wow, that's a great book. It's about H.H. Holmes, if you know anything about him, the serial killer. And I read Dead Wake, The Last Crossing of the Lusitania. Powerful book, by the way. Very powerful. In the Garden of Beasts, Love, Terror, and an American Family in Hitler's Berlin. That was probably my least favorite, the ones of his that I read. And then I also read Thunderstruck about Marconi. And that was pretty good too. So Isaac's Storm is something I've been wanting to pick up for quite a while. Here's what it says on the back of the book to kind of give you an idea. September 8th, 1900 began innocently in the seaside town of Galveston, Texas. Even Isaac Klein, resident meteorologist for the U.S. Weather Bureau, failed to grasp the true meaning of the strange, deep swells and peculiar winds that greeted the city that morning. Mere hours later, Galveston found itself submerged by a monster hurricane that completely destroyed the town and killed over 6,000 people in what remains the greatest natural disaster in American history. And Isaac Klein found himself the victim of a devastating personal tragedy. Using Klein's own telegrams, letters, and reports, the testimony of scores of survivors, and our latest understanding of the science of hurricanes, Eric Larson builds a chronicle of one man's heroic struggle and fatal miscalculation in the face of a storm of unimaginable magnitude. Thrilling, powerful, and unrelentingly suspenseful. Isaac Storm is a story of what can happen when human arrogance meets the uncontrollable force of nature. So that should really, I don't know, that excites me. I hope it excites you too. By the way, I'm going to put links for all of these books in the description. So if you want to read along with me and then report back later, compare notes, we can do that. So Isaac Storm, that was my first one. Eric Larson, fantastic writer. Now, the next one I picked up was Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick. Okay? Now, it says down at the bottom, a story of courage, community, and war. I scoured my Goodreads account, and I thought I had read books by Nathaniel Philbrick before. It turns out that I haven't, but apparently I've wanted to for a long time. I think what it is just, it's just a name that I see all the time in the history section of Books A Million, and I probably thought a million times about picking up his books, and so when I saw this, I picked it up, So anyway, here's what it says in the back. I thought I knew about the voyage of the Mayflower, but when I started to explore what happened when an old leaky ship arrived off the coast of New England in the fall of 1620, I soon realized that I, along with most Americans, knew nothing at all about the real people with whom the story of our country begins. The oft-told tale of how the Pilgrims and the Indians celebrated the first Thanksgiving does not do justice to the history of Plymouth Colony. Instead of an inspiring tableau of tranquil cooperation, the Pilgrims' first half-century in America was more of a passion play in which vibrant, tragic, self-serving, and heroic figures struggled to preserve a precarious peace, until that peace erupted into one of the deadliest wars ever fought on American soil. The English fatalities were catastrophic, but the rebellion Indians were virtually obliterated as a people. The promise of the first Thanksgiving had given way to the horror of total war. 100 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, this culminating event, King Philip's War, brought into disturbing focus the issues of race, violence, religious identity, and economic opportunity that came to define America's inexorable push west. But as the Pilgrims came to understand, war was not inevitable. It would be left to their children and grandchildren to discover the terrifying enormity of what is lost when two peoples give up on the difficult work of living together. More than 375 years later, in a world that is growing more complicated and dangerous by the day, the story of the Mayflower still has much to teach us. Doesn't that sound interesting? And this book was also in superb condition. Paperback, and it's not, weather beaten. That's the thing. That's the thing about, used books in a lot of cases, especially someplace like Goodwill, is that people have all the intentions of beginning a habit of reading. They get all excited. They go buy something, and then it just sits on their shelves, and they never do anything with it. And at some point, they go, I just got to get rid of this. But anyway, that was my second one that I got. And because I'm a lover of history, so I'm really excited about that. This other one, I can't believe I found this. This is Sunday Nights at 7, the Jack Benny story. And this is written by him and his daughter Joan. Now, what it is when it says it's written by him, this is published in 1990. He died in 1974 of pancreatic cancer. He was beginning a biography, never was able to finish it, so his daughter Joan did. The foreword is by George Burns. There's a lot to say there. Jack Benny, and when I was a teenager, I was in love with old comedy. And Jack Benny was one of my favorite ones. And I used to buy these cassette tapes of all the old comedy radio programs like Fred Allen, Charlie McCarthy, Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, Amos and Andy, Lum and Abner, George Burns, Gracie Allen, Jack Benny here. And those are all radio programs. This is all before they ever hit television. These are people who came out of vaudeville. They're extremely talented. Jack Benny is one of the funniest people, still to this day, that anybody I've ever heard. Clean comedy and brilliant comedy at that. And George Burns was always one of my favorites also. But George Burns and Jack Benny were best friends. And I just can't say enough. He would pretend to play the violin horribly, and he was actually really good, but his humor was just crazy. So it says here in the leaflet, time to tune in to the Jack Benny Show from 1934 to 1965 on radio and later TV. Millions of Americans kept that date with Jack, and it always left them laughing. The sparkling memoir is a story of Jack's life, told both in his own I can hardly say this word, inimitable words and in nostalgic reminiscences of his daughter, Joan. Using never-before-seen material from Jack's unfinished autobiography, Sunny Nights at 7 is packed with classic Benny comedy routines and entertaining anecdotes about everyone from Cary Grant to Marilyn Monroe to Harry Truman. That is quite a cast. The book reveals the real Jack Benny, tells what it was like to grow up as his daughter, and paints a glittering portrait of Hollywood during its heyday and the golden ages of radio and television. Most of all, it's having Jack in your home once again. Obviously, this is written to an era gone by. This time, talking about his own life, let him take you back to the good old days of vaudeville, when, as a struggling violin with joke act, he first met the Marx Brothers. They closed the show because nobody could follow them. Listen as he tells you about his audacious 1934 radio debut when Jello, folks, this is Jack Benny, was heard on the NBC Blue Network. His sponsors went into shock, but listeners bought Jello in record numbers, and Jack's star and style was born. Sunny Nights at 7 brings back the Jack Benny we remember so well, the deadpan, irascible cheapskate who played the violin, to everyone's dismay, insisted he was 39 to everyone's consternation, and fought a long-running battle of wits with Fred Allen that ended in an actual boxing match at Madison Square Garden. Jack's on-air character was so popular that most folks assumed it was the real thing. He was so convincing. That was the thing about him. He really was convincing, despite how funny it actually was. Like the hat check girl who returned his ample tip, begging him to leave me with some illusions. I tell you what, Jack Benny was known as his act was he was a cheapskate, a terrible violin player. One of his most famous skits was "Your Money or Your Life." Go onto YouTube, check that out, and you'll see just what kind of an act he had. He was great, so I'm excited about getting into that. Another one I picked up was actually 4 novels in one book by E.M. Forster. Those 4 novels are Where Angels Fear to Tread, The Longest Journey, A Room with a View, and Howard's End. I think all of these have been made into television programs and movies. A Room with a View, I believe, was a movie with Helen Bonham Carter in it. I never saw it. Howard's End was definitely, a miniseries and a movie also. I think Where Angels Fear to Tread was a much older movie. And The Longest Journey, I think, is probably his least popular novel. And the only E.M. Forster book I've ever read before is A Passage to India. I know I liked it, but it was back in 2015 when I read it, so I couldn't tell you much about it. I just remember liking it. So I don't read enough fiction. And this is going to keep me busy for a while. It's pretty thick. And I am excited about getting into it because these authors from this era are, because this, I think Howard's End, I think it was written in 1910. It takes place, like the Victorian, Edwardian era. I love that time. So as you're seeing the picture, these are 2, people of refinement. He's smoking a cigarette. She's dressed all nicely as he is, with a bottle of champagne, the ice bucket. And you just kind of imagine the scenario and the conversation that's going on there. So I'm excited about that. Another one I picked up was Voltaire's Candide. I've always wanted to read this. I am actually reading it right now. I'm about a third of the way through it. I like it. I like it a lot. Voltaire was kind of a controversial figure, which is an understatement. I have a feeling that if he lived nowadays, he would have a podcast. He's somewhat like Joe Rogan, doesn't like religion at all, poo-poos all of it indiscriminately. And he does make some good points. He does have some valid points about all of them. But he's very much a cynic, I believe, and an antagonist, it appears. He actually spent 11 months in the Bastille prison, and which I'm sure was horrid conditions. Captain Kidd was there for quite a long time. And not at the same time, but anyway, so I'm enjoying that right now. And then also, I've talked about this in a previous video. This is Tribes by Seth Godin. I really like Seth Godin. He's an author and marketing strategist. He's very popular on like YouTube. If you watch TED Talks, he's got a thing on there. He's very well known, written a lot of books, but he's also got quite a bit of renown for writing a blog a day. And he's been doing this for so many years. And this is a guy who walks the talk. And he's very inspiring. This book, here's what it says. Here's what it's about. A tribe is any group of people, large or small, who are connected to one another, a leader and an idea. For millions of years, humans have joined tribes, be they religious, ethnic, political, or even musical. Think of the Deadheads. It's our nature. Now the internet has eliminated the barriers of geography, cost, and time. All these blogs and social networking sites are helping existing tribes get bigger and enabling new tribes to be born. Groups of 10 or 10 million who care about their iPhones or a political campaign or a new way to fight global warming. Who's going to lead all these tribes? The web can do amazing things, but it can't provide leadership. That still has to come from individuals. People just like you who have passion about something. Anyone who wants to make a difference now has the tools at her fingertips. With a devoted, he goes on to say, if you ignore this opportunity to lead, you risk turning into a sheep walker, someone who fights to protect the status quo at all costs, never asking if obedience is doing you or your organization any good. Sheep walkers don't do very well these days. Tribes will make you think, really think, about the opportunities for leading your fellow employees, customers, investors, believers, hobbyists, readers. It's not easy, but it's easier than you probably imagine. So he is an international bestseller author. He used to own Yoyodyne. He sold to Yahoo for $30 million and became the vice president of direct marketing for Yahoo after that. His whole thing is that he believes that marketers do a single thing, and that's make change happen. When I read Tribes, when I look at the title Tribes, I think to myself, I'm not much of a tribalist myself. I'm not like that. But I think he means in a different sense. We're all part of a tribe in some way or another, whether you acknowledge it or not. And you're not as much of a lone wolf as you'd like to think, or at least as much as I'd like to think. And he helps you understand that you don't have to settle for mediocrity. You can forge your own path. You can make change happen. And I'll make more remarks about this later on. I'll make a separate video about these books after I've read them. But those of what I have picked up, I picked up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books, and one of them have 4 novels in it. It's pretty cool. So I'm excited about that. I'm already in 2 of them. What are you reading right now? What is your latest find? And where do you go to get your stuff? Perhaps you're thinking of something I haven't thought of. Leave a comment down below. Make sure you like this video. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. And don't forget to hit the notification bell. All right, guys. I've enjoyed it. Read on.